Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of this week's PC Gaming News. We took a bit of a hiatus here for a couple weeks, so I got a lot to catch up on. I'll be covering the launch of Far Cry 6. It's divisive, but I've actually enjoyed it. The Battlefield 2042 beta, which was less divisive. People just don't like it in general. Very poor reception. Got some big concerns here. There was the announcement of Ghost Recon Frontline. It seems everyone but me hates the idea of this. I'll explain myself, I promise. I also want to talk about Destiny 2's second round of content vaulting, Age of Darkness entering early access. We got a tease of some gameplay for Palia. There's some more Guild Wars 2 stuff, and of course, we had the launch of New World. How has that been going? Lots to talk about there. And then we'll wrap everything up with a look at this week's releases as well as some new betas. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into this video. No sponsor today. Congratulations. All right, so first up, we got Far Cry 6. This launched last week, and you know what? I really like it. Now, I'm well aware that this isn't straying far from the typical Far Cry formula. There's like a few new bells and whistles, a couple of new features, but the core gameplay is fundamentally the same as what they've done in the past few installments. However, as someone who hasn't played much of the series since Far Cry 3, coming back in with a fresh set of eyes, like if I'm being honest with everybody, I've been having a really good time. Going around finding collectibles, weapons, and gear sets, completing the various tasks, the mini events, going on treasure hunts, and of course, scouting and clearing out to the various enemy camps and bases. All of this set during a revolution on this tropical island, which provides a gorgeous backdrop. Yes, I have enjoyed my time with Far Cry 6. Now, reviews of the game have been fairly mixed. It's averaging like a 75 to 80 on the various aggregate websites, which I think sounds about right. Now, besides the game's content, there have been some other issues. I've seen a lot of reports of performance not being great. It does seem like I have been one of the lucky few in the over 20 hours that I've played. I haven't run into any performance problems. I have, on the other hand, dealt with a few bugs. Nothing that's been game breaking or made me want to stop playing, but there have been some bugs. And you know, I gotta say, I'm not trying to give this game a pass at any way. I would be lying if I didn't share with you that I've been playing it and enjoying it. Like, this is the game that I've been playing the most over this past week. It does seem, though, that if you played either of the last two Far Cries extensively at all, you're not getting enough new to the formula here. Since I barely touched those games, maybe like 5 hours each or so, the last Far Cry that I actually played through was 3. So for me, it's been a long enough a time away from this formula that I've really been enjoying the game. If anything, I would recommend probably just waiting until this thing goes on sale if you're even remotely unsure. Ubisoft games tend to go on pretty hefty discounts after some time. I think especially just give it time for them to hammer out some of these performance issues that people are reporting and many of the bugs that seem to be popping up for people as well. But hey, it's a Far Cry game. It's been a long time since I really played a Far Cry game, and I'm enjoying this Far Cry game. What else can I say? All right, moving on. Last week, we had the open beta for Battlefield 2042, letting us try the game for a few days. It featured the one map Orbital, which is this like rocket launch facility, along with the 128 player count game mode known as Conquest. Now, as is the case with most open betas that are so close to a game's launch, the whole idea is just to give players a taste of the game to get them excited for the release. Well, sometimes that backfires, and that seems to be the case here. There has been a ton of criticism of 2042, more so than like the usual grumblings of people who are just gonna be unhappy for whatever reason. No, there's some legitimate, strong critiques here. For one, performance. We're talking about game performance again, but yes, that is a major concern from what we saw with this beta. The game is running poorly even on high-end systems with top-of-the-line graphics cards or next-generation consoles. It's just not running very well, and apparently it is nearly unplayable on last generation, which is especially interesting given that they did things like halved the player count from 128 to 64. They also removed many of the more graphically demanding elements to the game in those last generation versions. But even with those changes, performance has reportedly been horrendous. Now, the complaints go beyond performance though, and this is the more damning issue. People simply seem unhappy with a lot of the design decisions of this game, from their new implementation of the specialist system, moving away from the classes that they had in the past. The game's presentation and UI people really dislike. Changes to the ping system, how you work with teammates, the flow of matches, the design of the one map that we saw. The list of grievances just go on and on. Honestly, every time I look and try to get more information about this game or people's impressions, I keep seeing new complaints and new issues that pop up. Now, I did play myself, but only briefly. I played for about 2 to 3 hours. Oddly enough, I couldn't tell you much about the experience. It's kind of weird. Like, I shot some dudes, I ran around and captured a few points, I saw the rocket launch, it was cool, but I don't know, I just kind of felt lost the whole time, which is really strange because I don't remember feeling so damn confused when I've played other Battlefield games in the past. And also, I will chime in here, my performance with the beta was pretty bad as well. I didn't escape it with this game, unfortunately. So it seems like there's a lot of concerns about 2042. We're only a few weeks away from the game's official launch. People are calling for it to be delayed. I would be surprised if that happens, honestly. I don't know, it might need it. If nothing else, this might be one of those things where it launches in kind of a rough state. You know, whether or not this was like an earlier build or not, how many times have we been through this? When you have a beta so close to launch, it almost always is indicative of what the launch experience is, even with day one patches. But we can hope for the best, right? So maybe this thing launches and none of these issues are a concern anymore. Well, I mean, I guess besides all the design decisions that a lot of people seem unhappy with. I've always enjoyed Battlefield 2 just for the bombastic nature of it, these huge maps with all this crazy stuff going on and so many people running around. And I hope that continues with 2042. Although again, with my just limited couple of hours of playtime with the beta, I just didn't really know what was happening. Maybe it's just my brain's not working? I don't know. All right, next up, let's talk about the new game from Ubisoft. They recently revealed the brand new title, Ghost Recon Frontline. This is a free-to-play, tactical action, massive PvP first-person shooter, in their words. In other words, it's basically looking just like a battle royale. You've got 100 players that will be in teams of 3. They will drop onto an island and compete to fight over these various objectives, gathering and then bringing this intel to these drop zones for them to extract. That extraction process will alert the other teams who can then move in and try to stop them. Parts of this are sounding very similar to what they did with the survival mode from The Division, which, by the way, every time I talk about this reminds me of how good that thing could have been. Survival, honestly, was one of my favorite modes of The Division. Came out just before the Battle Royale genre really exploded. And I do think that they were just a few design choices away from having an amazing experience. I don't think it helped either, though, that this thing was also part of a paid expansion. But point being, I do think Ubisoft was really close to making a great Battle Royale game. And I don't hate that they're trying it again. I know Hyperscape came and went. That was a flop for sure. But I think the Tom Clancy universe could be a better setting for them to try it again. And funny enough, they also have another large-scale competitive multiplayer shooter in the works. Many assume this is going to also be like a battle royale. It's called The Division Heartlands. We learned about this earlier in the year. We even had a bunch of super early test footage that got leaked, and it kind of looked like The Division Dark Zone, the game, basically, including having this difficult AI that you have to deal with and navigate around, which I guess one of the big differences between that and Frontline is the fact that Frontline is in first person and it's fully team focused. I do believe Heartland is supposed to have solo play as well, but regardless, reception to Frontland has been very poor. The announced trailer, it was overwhelmingly disliked, and I get it, like beyond people having a bit of battle royale fatigue, the fact that they're using the Ghost Recon IP here kind of feels like a misstep. Given the roots of the Ghost Recon series, I don't know that this battle royale thing really makes sense for it, although it is pretty clear at this point that Ubisoft is willing to throw Tom Clancy's name on just about anything. I mean, remember X-Defiant? They are just striking out with these new Tom Clancy releases. The reception has been so poor. Either way though, believe it or not, I am interested in Frontline. Listen, really the main reason is that I have very much so enjoyed many of Ubisoft's multiplayer games. We're taking a look at like The Division, Rainbow Six Siege, For Honor. Those 3 games are some of my favorite games of the last decade. I spent a ton of time and really liked each of those titles. So I am always interested to see what Ubisoft is working on next when it comes to their multiplayer competitive games or games that mix PvE and PvP. Ubisoft gets ragged on a lot, but they have released some of my favorite games of the past 10 years. I don't know what else to say. So I'm always at least keen to give it a shot. But yeah, X-Defiant, this new game, Frontline and Heartlands, it seems like the general gaming population isn't too excited about what they have in the hopper here for the next couple of years of games, but I'm gonna check that out. Like, I have to. Next up, I want to talk about some of Destiny 2 news that we got recently. Now, some of you might remember last year when Bungie revealed that they had plans to start vaulting content from Destiny 2, or in other words, they would be taking out parts of the game, some of which people had paid for, myself included. They removed stuff that I at one point spent money on. There was a long list of reasons and explanations for why this was happening. The biggest being that the way the game was coded made it difficult for them to continue adding new stuff with every season. The original plan was to keep releasing numbered sequels. Had that happened as originally planned, we would be on to and playing Destiny 3 by now. However, after Bungie split with Activision, they decided to go a different route and just stick with Destiny 2 longer, and apparently this has begun causing issues with the development process as they try to keep adding new content to the game. It gets more and more difficult. So they said that by removing some of that old content, it would be easier and help streamline and make it quicker for them to add new content for players to experience. They also were sure to point out the fact that the parts of the game that were being removed were being used by a very small percentage of the active player base, and that they had plans to regularly cycle back in some of what was taken out. Now, all of that took place in 2020. It was a fairly contentious event. I know myself, I was on the side of being frustrated at the idea that stuff that I paid for was simply no longer going to be available in the game. You know, it's one thing that at some point that content I paid for was rolled into the New Light base free game experience, but I don't care so much if stuff I paid for back then becomes free to new players in the future. I think it's more frustrating if the stuff that I paid for just isn't there. It isn't playable anymore. Honestly, it was pretty annoying to me. Well, the process is continuing. They recently revealed the second round of content vaulting that will be coming soon. In February 2022, the Forsaken expansions campaign, along with the Tangled Shore location, will be entering the vault and no longer playable. This is happening for all of the reasons that I mentioned a moment ago with their initial content vault. And again, in principle, I hate this. Like I said with the last round of vaulting, I purchase content for the game that come February next year, I will not have access to play if I boot the game back up. I think that's pretty shitty, honestly. Like, from a consumer perspective, that's kind of junky. Now, that's in principle. In actuality, I play the game so infrequently that I guess my opinion on this probably doesn't matter to most people. The people who play Destiny 2 every single day of the year, and yes, those people exist, it seems generally from what I've seen online, most of them are okay with it. And the biggest argument I see over and over again is the fact that they already played through the campaign and they have spent hours and hours and hours in the Tangled Shore, and there's no reason to go back there anymore, so they don't care if that stuff gets removed and they never play it again, if that means that Bungie can keep adding new stuff. And I totally get that argument. But from my perspective, just like the last time they did this, I think it's shit that I can't boot up Destiny 2 next year and revisit or replay stuff that I have paid for. Bottom line, I think it sucks. You can make arguments that this stuff is rarely seen, and that is certainly true. I'm not trying to deny, I'm not saying that people are spending every day in the Tangled Shore or anything like that, or replaying through that campaign. I know that doesn't happen, but I do think there's something special to a lot of these online games. You look at like MMOs in particular, because there's been this argument between like what is Destiny 2 compared to what an MMO is. It seems like the argument is Destiny 2 is like a seasonal game and you just have to play the seasons, and if you miss the season, you're out of luck even if you paid for it at one point. Regardless, there was something special about what a lot of these online games have when they keep adding new content and you come back to the game at some point and revisiting that stuff. There's a nice sense of nostalgia, and I think that can be a really enjoyable experience that Destiny 2 is simply not going to have. That's just not the game they're building. It seems like that's the case. I do hope, though, that when we eventually get Destiny 3, that they're able to build the game's foundation in a way that will allow the content that is added to the game, that people pay for in the game, to always be there throughout the life cycle of the game. So 10 years down the road, if I boot up Destiny 3, I can see those initial experiences or play through those story missions or whatever that I could when that game was initially released. That's just coming from the perspective of what is a casual Destiny 2 fan. Like, I love the game, but I don't play it every day. And I get that people who do are tired of the Tangled Shore and they don't care to replay the story. But some people do, and I think we should consider that perspective. Ultimately, the developer gets the say, though. I can kick and scream all I want. It's up to them. They're taking out content I paid for, and I can do shit about it. Last week, we got the release of this early access game, Age of Darkness. This is a dark fantasy survival RTS. I've talked about this in a couple of videos. It was in my top 10 upcoming PC games for the month. You start out with this keep. You've got a hero, a couple of knights and archers, and then you just go out exploring this procedurally generated landscape. You fight these little nightmare creatures. You look for new resource locations, all the while building up a stronghold and these defenses to try to survive these death knights. Now, these come periodically after a few day-night cycles go through, and during the death nights, these hordes of enemies start attacking and trying to take out your keep, and this gets increasingly more difficult. Now, besides Far Cry 6, this is the other game that I've been playing a bunch over this past week. I think it's decent. It does feel a little bare bones, but it has an interesting premise. Also, the game is insanely hard. So far, I've played about 8 hours, and I still have not finished a single round of survival mode on the normal difficulty. There's multiple difficulties in the game, easy, normal, and hard, and then there's 2 additional difficulties. I haven't even done a full cycle on normal. It's that hard. I keep getting to the 3rd Death Knight, which takes, mind you, about an hour and a half to 2 hours to reach in my experience. And at that point, I have to fend off this wave of 6,000 enemies. Yes, 6,000. It starts off with a few hundred and then a couple of thousand, then it goes to 6,000. And I do remember reading in their early copy about this game's information that they can support over 40,000 troops on screen. It's just ridiculous. But even that 3rd wave of 6,000 enemies was just insane. Like, I have not sorted out the best strategy to defend against it. So it's a kind of a cool game. I do think the process drags on a little bit. Like I said, to get to that 3rd wave, it takes about 2 hours or so, give or take, depending on how much you pause. But that's the other thing. The game has a pause. It's got save. So it's not necessarily meant to be played through in one sitting. All around, I think it's an interesting game. I think it's worth keeping an eye on. Maybe I'll come out with a video impression at some point if I get some time in the next couple of weeks, but there's a lot of games coming out, so we'll see. But keep your eye on this one. Steam reviews are pretty decent as well, so that's worth noting. Moving on, I want to talk about Palia. We got our first look at gameplay for the game, actual honest to goodness gameplay. This is that upcoming chill hangout, like social MMO. Now, on the official Twitter account, they released about 13 seconds of gameplay footage, so yeah, it's not much, but it does look pretty good. Like, I think they nailed the visuals with this game. Seeing this small chunk of gameplay has me that much more interested already. In addition to this, we also got some aerial flyby footage of what looks to be a major town. This also looks pretty sharp. My biggest question right now with Palia is how engaging the gameplay will be, like in terms of systems and things to do. It's pretty clear that they made a game that looks fantastic, and from that 13 seconds, it seems to run well. I know they do have some tests planned for the coming months and early next year, so I'm hoping to get my hands on this game. Non-combat focused MMOs aren't usually what I'm interested in, but this thing does look really good. So if they can make engaging farming systems and exploration and puzzle solving, and I mean, I hope there's enough combat to make it something that you can viably do, but it is kind of meant to be more of a social MMO, so we'll have to see. I did want to briefly mention some updates for Guild Wars 2. There was a recent live stream where we got a detailed look at a new island location that's coming in the next expansion. In this, they show off various sections of the island along with a couple of missions. They show some events and some jumping puzzles. It's all pretty cool. There's about an hour and a half of new stuff to see if you're interested in sitting down through that. I've been pretty busy recently with other games, so my Guild Wars 2 obsession has come to a halt, but I got a few characters to level 80 and I'm working through some of the elite mastery specs, so I think I should be pretty ready for the expansion when it launches next year. My revisit to the game overall was exceedingly enjoyable. I had a great time with it, and I am still hoping and planning at some point this fall to put together a video kind of recapping how my revisit to the game went. And then the final big story for this week, I couldn't not talk about it. We had the launch of New World. Now, since the last episode of this show, the game officially launched, and it's been one heck of a ride. For one, it's insanely popular. They reached a peak of over 913,000 concurrent players. That makes this the 4th highest peak concurrently played Steam game of all time. That is an absurd number of people to be playing the game at once. Now, along with all those players came the insane queues. The first week, those first few days were just ridiculous. Some people were waiting an entire day to be able to just log in to some of the more popular servers. Now, to deal with this, they added a bunch of brand new servers. They told people, make characters on those servers. We'll eventually allow server transfers so you can go from one server to another once the things die down. Amazon also implemented some things to deal with people trying to dodge AFK timers. This is something that any popular MMO with server caps will contend with. Apparently, Amazon hadn't planned for that ahead of time. But anyways, we also, in addition to this, have had the mess of the server transfer issues, basically Amazon backing out on some previously promised region transfers that would be available. So server transfers are an option, but if you're trying to move from like EU to NA, apparently that's not going to be a thing. And reception to the game itself, like how is the game? It's been fairly mixed. In spite of the insane popularity, there has been plenty of complaints, or maybe because of the insane popularity, there's been a lot of complaints. But either way, yeah, the game has a fair number of issues, a lot of concerns about the simplicity of the combat, the longevity of the game, things to do, especially come the end game. These are things that I've talked about a lot on this channel since we played that very first public test. Many of these problems haven't changed with time, and they're just coming to light as more people start to reach the mid game and get to the end game. I mean, it's been a pretty crazy ride for New World. I am super excited that we have a new MMO to sink our teeth into. This does not happen often, and it's always fun when it does. Now, I've been taking things very, very slow. I gotta tell you, I am in no rush. I'm not even planning to reach endgame in the next couple of weeks. This is in stark contrast to how I usually play MMOs. Usually, I want to be there in that first 1 to 2 weeks and reach endgame as fast as possible. But I also found that tends to lead to the quickest burnout. There's been a lot of other games I've been playing recently, as we've talked about so far at this point in the episode. So I'm basically planning on just waiting until things calm down with New World. I know in the next couple of weeks, the population will really dive off, and I plan to jump in at that point. I'm just not fussed with reaching endgame as fast as possible like I normally do. We'll see how things pan out for New World. I think the big question is going to be 2 and 3 months in, people reach the end game. They've been doing a lot of gathering and crafting. There's not a ton of PvE in terms of like variety of stuff to do, and the PvP is really what people are going to be spending most of their time with. So how do they enjoy doing those wars multiple times a day? How do they enjoy Outpost Rush? And what does Amazon have planned for the fall and the spring and next summer in terms of new content? They clearly have been successful. They've clearly made a lot of money off of the launch of this thing. You don't get to 900,000 peak concurrent players and not have raked in a ton of dough. So we'll have to see where they take this game from here. Yeah, this is a long journey, and again, I'm not in a rush to get to the end game and stop playing. I'll take my time. I'll play some other games in between, but I'm happy that New World is here. I'm happy that it's had some success, clearly, and we'll see how it goes. We got a couple of other games coming out this week. First up there is Book of Travels, the atmospheric online RPG that takes place in this hand-drawn, fairy tale-inspired world. The style, I think, will put some people off, but I appreciate its uniqueness. This launched on October 11th, so this Monday, for $29.99. And then this week, we also have Back 4 Blood launching, the 4-player co-op first-person zombie shooter. Reviews have started rolling in. They seem okay, decent, not bad, kind of like Far Cry 6. They're getting average, middling reviews. I think there's still a lot of concerns about Back 4 Blood. Apparently, they're really limiting the single-player experience. For one, the AI is pretty horrendous from what I've heard. And then also, they really cut back on what you can unlock if you play solo and you don't go into multiplayer. Hopefully, this is something they address for people who like to play or want to play this game solo. And then finally, I want to mention that there is a beta test for the Cycle happening. This is that free-to-play PvEVP first-person shooter. It's basically like a mix of Battle Royale with PvE objective-based mechanics. There's a closed beta running from now until November the 1st if you're interested. And that pretty much does it for this week's PC gaming news. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the episode. We had a ton to catch up on. I'm sure there's plenty of stories that I missed, but you know, I had a couple of weeks to go through. I'm going to try to continue to make this an actual weekly thing. It was actually on a pretty good run, but yeah, the last couple of weeks it's just been hectic. There's been a lot going on. So anyways, thank you for watching. Appreciate your support. I'll see you next week for another episode. Take it easy, guys.